So I wanted to discuss a topic about ritual abuse. Now there's many forms of ritual abuse, but one I wanted to talk about that rarely gets talked about or even overlooked is vampiric ritual abuse. Okay, so this one is in the inverted form of erotocomatose lucidity. Now, the left-hand path Luciferian practice of darker depths, and I'm not saying that all those that practice Luciferian Tantra do this. I'm saying that there are predatory types that do use and misuse magic and ritual practices to gain power and abuse their target. So yeah, one form is the inverted vampiric form of erotocomatose lucidity as a predatory tool for energy absorption and empowerment rather than the passive communication with a higher power. Crowley's original erotocomatose lucidity aims at liberating the spirit through exhaustive sexual stimulation into liminal trances, neither awake or asleep, for visionary contact. However, the inverted vampiric variant flips that completely, and the intent is to drain the vital life force of the energy of the target for the adept to gain power and enslave, really, that person. So there's fear and, sexual energy being used, and so we know that there's demonic and lower astral forces feed off of that. So they're feeding off of that energy, and that trauma bond is created through that fear. So as I said, its main purpose was to liberate the spirit through exhaustive sexual stimulation into a liminal trance. And, it's not like where you have the practitioner using it to stimulate or have a partner stimulate them into that exhaustion to get into that trance state without, releasing bodily fluids, okay, and coming to reach that orgasmic state. So they don't, that it's taught in Gnosticism too, and ancient Egypt, right, that you refrain from, releasing that energy. So it's targeted at moving that energy up the channels of the chakra, right? So up, to the the channel of the top crown chakra. Anyway, and that's how you have that divine connection, or, maybe for manifesting, whatever the purpose, but this is totally different. It's like the inverted, there's always the inversion of the divine. So this is the inversion of the divine, which is the downward into the root and the enslavement of the trauma bond of, because there's fear there's that fear into that exhaustive state, that liminal state, and which can even cause death. So, and that is the way that they're directing the right, to instead, that divine connection of the union, it is the systematically drain the vital force, magical will, and the sexual energy. And this is usually used primarily with oral stimulation and control techniques that prevent the target from full release or recovery. And Crowley himself described a version of this as leading to the transfer of power and potential enslavement of the spirit when pushed towards exhaustion or death. And how the left-hand path Luciferian adepts frame and apply it. So the Luciferian currents, particularly those influenced by these writings, these vampiric magical practices in Luciferian Tantra, is related to the Typhonian or Qliphothic streams and treat it sexually as primary engine of power, and the focus is self through Samuel, Lilith, Set, or Lucifer, these currents, okay? So, but Typhonian kind of, the Qliphothic, currents that are used, the method is to use as energy, vampirism, life force absorption, and the adept repeats these cycles of intense arousal and near collapse, and not the nuptial union connected to the divine. It's the opposite. So it connects to the adept, the energy is transferred. It's like someone just sucking the life force out of you. And, we see this with trauma and abuse, people aren't aware because, they're not aware of this because, even on a larger scale, even with pornography, the releasing of the energy, getting really turned on, and then releasing that, and feeling exhausted afterwards, it's draining that prana energy. It's draining your testosterone. They've proven that. It lowers your testosterone. Scientifically, they've proven this. So that's your magnetism that you're draining, where you will be less powerful. So I guess maybe that's another reason why some forms of Luciferian Tantra uses, like the Luciferian vampiric Tantra uses this, is to gain the power of the life force so they can still, release their own energy. Who knows? I don't know. But I think maybe more so it's probably they have a attachment. And as I would say with most things, even narcissists and abuse, there seems to be some kind of attachment there that drains the energy of the victim and into sickness, into mental health issues, especially like anyone that knows anything about, the occult and the anatomy of the human body and the psychic centers within the human body, how that generates and how that can affect, like how planetary forces can affect, organs too. It all comes together if you understand all this, within the body, within the body. That it causes auric holes that through the trauma that creates holes where the practitioner can drain your energy. And that's why people, usually they need energetic healing also, because your nervous system is what protects you. And they usually have problems with the nervous system, like central nervous system disorders, autonomic nervous system disorders, autoimmune diseases, all these things, central nervous system disorders, because it all affects that, right? Thyroid too. So understanding this will make you more aware of what may be happening with someone that either has an attachment to them, which is either a sex addict, a narcissist, or an abuser, or someone that practices the left-hand path and seems to have, this predatory energy. So the energy released or generated is deliberately drawn into the adept's own subtle body, and their chakras to an astral form. And the mirror's broader Luciferian vampiric techniques draining the prana through sexual contact, breath, gaze, or tactile focus while the target is held in a liminal state. The goal is expansion of the adept's power, vitality, and the magical expansion. And these are predatory initiation and shadow integration. The trance state is used to open the target, and sometimes the adept to nightside clipopic forces, dark adepts meet invoke Lilith, or any kind of Typhonian current that is working in those spheres, whatever that may be that the practitioner is invoking. And this carries a negative charge, The liminal haze becomes a gateway for the adept to feed while simultaneously strengthening their own demonic self. In some framework, this aligns with retroversion of inversion of ordinary process, turning generative sexual energy into devouring current of control, binding, and will transfer. When taken for enough, the technique is described as weakening or binding the target's spirit's will, so the residual power can be claimed. This is explicitly vampiric in inversion Crowley noted. So Luciferian practice is framed as an act of the strong asserting dominance, and it causes the enslavement. Now, I wanted to expose this for personal reasons that I will not say, okay, but just be aware of it and protect yourself. And the way that I have learned to protect myself is that I hold on to my energy very strongly, not to the point of exhaustion. I hold on to it to the point of raising it into my crown chakra. When you learn to raise it, this accumulates in the crown chakra where you want it to accumulate. You don't want it to descend into the root chakra. So yeah, that's all I've got to say about that subject for right now.